Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about what food I use. Honestly, the food that I use is pretty simple. It's pretty much just Pangaea. That's all I use, Pangaea and crickets. I use Pangaea growth and breeding, Pangaea watermelon, and I use Pangaea with insects. And what I'll do is, I always mix in 50% growth and breeding, and then one feeding I'll do 50% growth and breeding, and then I'll do 50% watermelon. Then the next feeding I do 50% with insects and 50% growth and breeding. So on that front, it's pretty simple as far as what I feed. I've just found that everybody eats that. I've tried fig, was it fig and insects? I've had that. Papaya, apricot. I think there's a couple other flavors. I've tried the Rapashi brands. My geckos really didn't like them, but then again, they've all been raised on Pangaea, so like sometimes what they're raised on is kind of what they stick with, at least in my experience. So as far as that goes, I'm pretty much strictly, not pretty much, I am strictly Pangaea at this point. I'll work in other flavors maybe in the future, but for right now, everything's working fine, and I can tell that by the time I switch to feeding, that first feeding is when they eat the most, and it's probably because they're the most excited about it. So that's something that's what I feed, because I know a lot of people ask me like, hey, what do you feed, or what do you recommend to feed? For me, I recommend feeding whatever your gecko will eat. That's a complete Crestie gecko diet. But for me, it's Pangaea, and that's what all of our babies eat, and that's what our adults eat, and that's what everybody eats. That's what even Gary eats. So but then the other thing that I do is I feed crickets. Now I feed crickets once a week, and I'll feed anywhere from 4 to 8 per gecko. So that's something that I like to do. I get some pushback. People say you don't have to do that, or that it's not necessary. In my opinion, just with what I've seen and how I raise my babies grow up faster, healthier, stronger looking. They don't just get fat, they look strong, they look good, and they hit those weight gain marks a little bit faster. And to me, that's kind of more important to having an overall healthy gecko, in my opinion. And I think crickets are very much part of that, because in the wild, crickets are very much part of their natural diet, or just protein, extra protein in general is very much part of their natural diet. So to me, crickets are huge, 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 huge. If you have an undersized gecko that you get, and let's say it's a year old and it's 10 grams, I would start feeding that thing crickets. I would start giving it 6 a week, and as soon as you notice all 6 are gone, I would put 6 more in there, because they need to grow at that point, and crickets really help with the growth spurts that I've noticed my crested geckos go through. If you like watch crested geckos as they grow, it's one of those things where they grow super slow, but you almost see that they have like 4 or 5 like crazy growth spurts where all of a sudden in 1 month they packed on 7 grams, and you're like, how did that happen? I've never been able to accomplish that through just Pangaea, but once I give crickets, I feel as though I get more of those growth spurts. Now that could just be all in my head, like, oh great, you know, I'm feeding protein, so they gotta grow. But in my opinion, feeding them that, it helps get those growth spurts going. The Pangaea is just fine. Once they hit adulthood, I feed crickets still, because I get to dust them in calcium, and that kind of helps with the breeding side of things. But once they hit adulthood, like if you want to do crickets once a month even, that's fine, because they don't really need as much protein, because they're not really growing as much anymore. But then that's where I get into more for crickets for my adults, is it's equal parts, because I think that they need it, and I think that it's good enrichment for them to hunt around their tanks. That's just a personal thing with me. But, you know, overall what I feed, Pangaea, crickets, dubias are great. I don't do dubias only because I can't put them in the substrate, because they'll just burrow, and I like to let my geckos hunt their food. And crickets are up at the same time as the geckos, so it works out pretty good. But that's kind of the biggest thing is, one thing that I just kind of want to push is if you do have an undersized gecko, or gecko that you feel is undersized, and you want to pack on some grams on it because it needs it, you need to offer crickets, and offer the Pangaea too. I mean, make sure you're placing that every 48 hours. but make sure you're offering crickets, because crickets are going to help with those growth spurts. Trust me, try it out. If it doesn't work, you know, comment down below it doesn't work, and don't tell me that your gecko's scared of crickets. I'm not buying that. Dump them in there and I guarantee you it will eat some of them. I guarantee it. I have not found one gecko that is scared of crickets. I've seen geckos that eat less crickets than others, but full on deny crickets every single time. If I offer them 4 times in a row, they're gonna eat at least half of those times, and by the end of the week the crickets are gone in every tank. It's very, very, very rare that there's any leftovers. So feed crickets, feed Pangaea. I always do 50-50. I always put in growth and breeding. I recommend that if you have a gecko that's still growing to get to a breeding weight, I always recommend doing that. And if you have a female, you should probably always be feeding growth and breeding in there, because she's gonna need calcium to build those eggs. So that's what I feed my geckos, guys. Comment down below what you feed and let me know your success stories, and maybe if this video helped you out, let me know. But until next time, stay safe and stay positive. I'll catch you guys on the next one.